Okay,
Okay.
so I am Dr. Geoff DePaula from I Am Health. I am interviewing Peter Chappell from Source Medicine, the founder and creator of Source Medicine. And how are you doing today, Peter?
I'm doing all right. It's one of those days when not all the technicalities of life go right.
Okay,
Or Good Friday at the moment, I think. We call it Good Friday, and I find that slightly strange because it's when they took a guy and they nailed him up on the cross and said, "Oh, it's good, is it?"
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to have this interview with you today and just talk to you a little bit about sort of how, who you are, what your background is, and how you developed Source Medicine. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about, your professional career. I know you said you started out as a rocket scientist. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. I started out in the aerospace industry as an apprentice when I was 16, which is now 64 years ago. I started work. So I was obviously somewhat good at it, and I became a research engineer. And we started. And I got my first patent when I was about 25 on a bit of a missile guidance system, which and I didn't think about ethics in those days.
Right.
And then I also worked on things like ATMs and the original ATMs and an original word processor before the word concept of word processor was actually invented. So I had my name on 3 patents by the age of 26.
Okay.
And then for some crazy reason, I decided to become a homeopath.
Well, how did that happen?
Well, actually, I started. I was at Cambridge University doing a postgraduate degree in control engineering, and I started asking around, said, "Excuse me, but I've got this mind and I've got this body, but how's it all work? And don't tell me that. Oh, where's the manual? If I've got a motorbike and it's got a manual and tells me how to look after it and mend it and things. Got this body and I don't have a manual. And and of course the professors and those sort of people didn't comprehend the question. So I started, personal inquiry, and then eventually I came across a spiritual teacher in London who not only knew all the answers to my questions, but knew so many. It was a bit like going to Shakespeare and saying, "Could you please teach me what's the meaning of and b and s and d?" And I was suddenly out of my depth, and I suddenly got answers far greater than anything I could comprehend. So then I found a spiritual journey, which also tailored me into a homeopathic profession as well. So, so I transferred, not intelligently. I mean, if I was money orientated, I would not have transferred from a high earning profession where I had, by the age of 26, a detached house with 3 or 4 lawns and a garage and all the full works of suburbia, and to becoming a homeopath, which is not a high earning profession and hard work and against the system and such like. But I did anyway.
And where did you do your training? Didn't you study with some great...
I studied, yeah. I mean, effectively in those days, it was back in the 60s, maybe early 70s. There weren't really any really good training programs. So I studied with this old guy who was a spiritual teacher first, and then I studied with some of the world's leading homeopaths. A man called George Vitulkas was the real creme de creme as far as I was concerned. He was the most grounded, practical, Greek, solid, reliable sort of guy who also was amazing in his insights. So a lot of us studied with him from around the world. And from him, we sort of bootstrapped ourselves up from 17th or 19th century homeopathy to 21st century homeopathy.
And didn't George Vitulkas win like a Nobel Prize or something like that?
He got the alternative Nobel Prize. You wouldn't get a Nobel Prize as a homeopath because that's just too far out. Right. It's not official science.
Right.
It's beyond science. And science, there's a friend of mine knows the guy who runs Wikipedia, and forget his name, Jimmy something. Anyway, he said there's 2 contentious subjects on Wikipedia, and that's Jesus Christ and homeopathy.
Right. So you were in practice since the 60s, doing homeopathy, and then, you know, you treated people for a number of decades, until you had sort of a calling. Is that right?
Well, yeah, when my sort of practice, I got bored after about 30 years and I started teaching it overseas. So I expanded my practice into teaching homeopathy in lots of different countries. I ran masterclasses and courses in homeopathy, put teams together and got people learning how to do homeopathy in countries which didn't have it. And I found I was quite good at that in spite of my lack of language skills. I just had good interpreters. And so for 10 years, I did that sort of thing. And then I thought, well, I've done enough. At the age of 60, I thought, I've done enough. I've justified my existence. What should I, you know, I think I'll row back now and just take life easy. But instead, I had this inspiration to go to Africa and work on AIDS, because at that time, the drugs for AIDS had just about been invented, but they were pricing them at like $10,000 a year. And it was like 100 times more than the Africans could afford. And at the same time, the Africans were dying like by the millions of AIDS, and really were dying massively. And the drug companies wouldn't reduce their prices until they were finally leveraged to do so by Bill Clinton and other such people. Mm-hmm. And so I went to Africa in 2000, the year 2000, to work on AIDS with homeopathy. That was my inspiration. I started in the clinic there and started treating people.
And so tell me about your experience doing that.
Well,
what were you trying to accomplish?
Well, I was trying to see in the West, people, my colleagues, homeopaths who were trying to treat gay guys with HIV/AIDS, were getting nowhere really. They were just firefighting them, so they didn't have a clue they didn't really know how to do it. And so I went to Africa, didn't know how to do it either, but I saw that I wouldn't learn from them, and I'd known already that I could practice homeopathy in very way out sort of places where I could get results. Anyway, so I went to Africa and I tried to understand AIDS, and it was a big stigma to start with. And I collected 70 cases, which took a lot of doing because people didn't want to admit it. But I took 70 cases and I looked at it and I tried treating them with conventional homeopathy, and I saw that I could get some results, but I couldn't do it properly, because never in the history of homeopathy had anybody ever found a single remedy that treated a single disease. And it slowly dawned on me this was a great big gaping hole. And in Africa, you know, you could have sophisticated systems like we have in the West for treating infectious diseases, but you can't do that in Africa when, you know, you just need one medicine for one disease, and you've got millions of people with the same thing. You couldn't upscale it in that system. That was completely upscaling, and some people non-unscalable. And some people have tried for at least 10 years to upscale homeopathy for treating HIV/AIDS, for example, and as far as I can see, they've failed. You know, you get to 1,000 patients and they're stuck. So what I did was I looked at it and I said, well, this is completely outside my experience and also completely outside anybody else's experience. So I decided I'd do something what I called reverse engineering. I would say, instead of trying the conventional system in homeopathy, is you take a plant, let's say, and you make it into a homeopathic remedy, and then you give it to people in slightly poisonous doses and find out what it does to them. And from that, you can work out what it's for. It's called a proving, and it's a systematic system, and it works really nicely. It's a bit tricky, but you can do it. But I realized that since no one had ever found a single example of this working for an epidemic disease, that was an avenue of lost opportunity, lost possibilities, or no possibilities. So I decided to reverse engineer it and request a remedy for AIDS in a bottle, in a sort of homeopathic bottle of water and alcohol. Okay. And I've never done that before, and I'd sort of heard the concept, but never done it and didn't believe it, but I did it. And I had to sort of take on some sort of I had to self-initiate myself into the process, I suppose, onto a new level of understanding or intention, or new level of doing something. So I did it, and I watched this bottle for a couple of weeks until I realized it was ready to go. And I've no idea at the time of the process, but I knew how to understand it. So, and then I tried it, and about 2 weeks after that, and I started offering it to my patients, to my new patients, because I had a queue every morning.
And what exactly did you offer them? Was it pills or liquids or?
Pills. It was a liquid. It was actually in bottle. I did it in the normal homeopathic thing. I gave them a bottle of it in water. I gave it in mineral water, and gave them full instructions and left them to it. And 2 weeks later, 5 people. Well, in Africa, the clinics work in the morning. They come in the morning and they go home in the afternoon. And there's no lights after dark, so no one likes to be out after dark in Africa because there's no street lights and things, so you don't do that. So it's a morning event, and there'd be a queue of people every morning once I got going. And anyway, after 2 weeks on this new idea, this new thing, which I had no experience of, they all came back completely cured. And they told me, they gave me hugs and things and let me know that, in a way, ordinary peasant type, I don't mean rural people talk about, they just said, I'm better. And you knew that they were really better.
When you say they all came back, do you mean 5 or the 7?
5 people came back one morning.
Okay.
For the first group that I treated, came back and told me they were better and completely better. And from that moment onwards, I realized this thing worked. I'd had enough experience of treating people in rural communities where you get much better results than with industrialized Westerners eating out of supermarkets. And so I knew that this was working, and I just kept repeating it, and it very quickly became obvious it worked every time. And so I compiled cases after cases, and of course the word went out. Then because it worked, they told everybody. And then I had queues every morning. And I eventually treated, I think, about 300 people. And I documented every one of them, and I watched it and see what happened. Now, at the time, they were just beginning to have viral load and CD4 tests in Africa, in Ethiopia. They had one lab run by a professor from Brown University in the States. And he'd installed it, probably because he was Ethiopian in origin. And I spoke to the guy. He was a lovely guy, and we got on fine, and he understood what I was doing. But unfortunately, the tests were costing $175 for the 2, and I needed before and afters and such like, and I then needed repeats of the before and afters to what was going on, and I didn't have the $20,000 that would take for even a small number of people. So I did a few tests, but those in the early days, but I saw results. But the fact was I had the results. It was very clear clinically. So, and that still took me a couple of years to really believe in, because it was beyond belief and beyond any sort of, it didn't make, well, it was such a new thing, it didn't make sense to me. But it did work, and I knew a result when I saw it.
And so, of the 300 people, what percentage of them were? When you say they were better, what does that mean in layman's terms?
Well, typically they'd walk in with having lost a lot of weight. They'd lost, let's say, 20 kilos. They'd be down from, say, 70 kilos to 50 kilos, or 60 down to 40. And they could only walk 5 or 10 meters before they were exhausted. And after 2 weeks, they could walk 15 kilometers, work all day long, cleaning or on some physical job, farming or whatever, and they could walk all the way home again. That's the difference. And it was very reliable. I formed a rule. My first rule was, Peter's first rule, this remedy always works. And then if it doesn't work, there must be something obvious. So I quickly found out what was obvious. Their first rule was, if it didn't work, it's because they had nothing to eat. They were so poor that they hadn't got any money, so they could get to me, but they couldn't eat. They had no money to eat. And what happens when you start recovering from AIDS, you get a ravenous hunger, like a dog. You want to eat like a dog, they'd often say. absolutely desperate hunger, because suddenly all the fungus from your mouth is gone and down your stomach, and you've got your hunger back and your appetite, and you've lost a lot of weight and you just want to eat. So the first thing I did was I instigated a food delivery, an aid program, which was for approximately $1, I could feed them for 2 weeks. So I either give them $1 if I trusted them, with strict instructions and not to feed anybody else, just feed yourself for 2 weeks, and then you'll have enough strength to earn the money to feed others in your family, which usually worked, but occasionally people were unreliable, so then we gave them a bag of maize or something. We gave them enough food for 2 weeks to get better with. The other reason they didn't get better were only two other reasons. One, they didn't take it. They didn't understand the instructions. And given I work in Ethiopia, they spoke 81 languages and 210 dialects. You had slight problems with and your interpreter might know 2 or 3 at a push.
Right.
And interpreters weren't very good to start with anyway. It's not fair to them really, but they weren't, my language, their English wasn't so perfect.
Right.
So, and the other one was, of course, if they were having sex. So if providing they could eat, and providing they took it, and providing they didn't have sex with an infected person, because what happened is if you've got HIV/AIDS, chances are your partner's got it. And if you keep having the sex, you're cross-infecting each other. So if they're providing they're not having unprotected sex, then they got better. And so pretty much 99% of people got better without a problem. And the other 1% I could clear up just by salting, giving them food or telling them to not have sex.
And so when a couple was infected, you would treat both of them and then they could have sex?
Yeah. We treat both of them and tell them to lay off the sex or use condoms.
Okay. But after they got better, they could have sex again if they were, say married?
Well, that's a moot point. Well, they would be basically, they would be. It will be, well, the way that this resonance or this remedies, we called it then and now we call it resonance, worked is it created immunity, self-immunity from the disease. So if they were to get infected again, they would naturally know how to resist it, providing it wasn't too heavy a dose. It's a bit like the people with corona right now. If you're a frontline worker with no protection, even with a strong immune system, you get overwhelmed. But if you're a strong person with a strong immune system and you just walk about a bit and you make a few contacts, it doesn't overwhelm you.
Right.
So, so far as I could see, after you treated it, it was fine. It wasn't a problem. You didn't get reinfected from sex again.
And so that was back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, back in 2001, really.
And so after the first 300 people, then what?
Well, then I installed the remedy. I wrote articles about it, got it published in Homeopathic Press, installed the remedy into homeopathic pharmacies in Netherlands and in England and later in Austria, and told people about it, and people bought it, and other people went to Africa and used it, and very quickly people could buy it from the pharmacies and then go to Africa and use it and see that they got results. So that worked really well, and it was good for me because it meant that I wasn't in the loop somehow, psychically or some sort of way that energetically. I was out of the loop. It worked. Others could get exactly the same results. And there's websites with lots of videos on that which talk about it.
So when you say the same results, you mean in Africa? In
Africa. The problem was, at the time, I tried to introduce it a bit later, in a couple of years with the results I had, I tried to introduce it into the gay population in the West. But they were pretty much by that time hooked on the drugs. And they were so pleased that they could actually stay alive. They weren't interested in entertaining any other possibility. So there wasn't an entree into the gay population, which was the main other group of people that had it in the West. And I didn't have any resources. And I tried talking to the gay press and I tried talking to all sorts of people, but basically didn't work, didn't get through. So I wasn't really interested in the West because the West had a contained situation with a drug that was gradually improving. whereas Africa, they were dying literally by the millions. So I went to other countries in Africa and introduced it there. For example, in the Durban Times, on the Durban Sunday Times, I had a double-page spread, and it said something like, Peter Chappell, madman or genius.
What did you say? Peter Chappell what?
Madman or genius.
Okay.
And, you know, the reporter and I had a nice interview. She said, it's the only way I'll get it in. I've got to put both sides. But with that, she put it in, and we gave the contact to where I was living at the time, and hundreds of people turned up and collected a dose of it, collected it for themselves. You know, quite middle-class couples and working-class couples and, well, working, you know, people of all ages and whatever came and got it.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, nothing came of that because we've done this in many countries now. There must be a dozen countries where we've run clinics, and the local health officials have turned up and they've looked at it and, you know, said, and we're happy to have it there. And but they didn't do anything. They passed the message up maybe to the Minister of Health and that sort of thing, but they were mostly interested in getting their relatives treated. But they didn't mean that they were going to change the law or recognize it if we didn't provide them with some sort of westernized explanation of how it worked.
Right.
But, which we couldn't really do.
Right. So when you said that you were originally working with, you know, I guess the concept is, you know, trying to find remedies that are what are called, you know, the miasms, like, you know, for a particular disease like the flu, for example. And you were trying to find that for AIDS, is that correct?
Yeah.
Originally? And then you decided to create a remedy for the actual disease instead of trying to find the handful of remedies that might be a good fit for a particular individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you use the word request. I requested it.
Yeah.
And so maybe you could talk a little bit about your, you know, whatever you feel comfortable with, talking about the sort of epiphany that you had and how that unfolded.
Well, I'd done quite a lot of, I don't know, spiritual training when I was a young man, because once I started asking the question, how's life work, I started getting answers, and then I needed to train to understand the answers. And so I sort of, and I did a lot of healing circles. I attended a regular healing circle with a proper ritual to it. And so I gradually learned how to do these things. So I learned how you could conduct a healing circle. And that sort of equipped me by apprenticeship without my understanding that with skills that I didn't really realize how to use. But anyway, so what I did was I think I made a deeper level of connection to, let me say, the conscious world, or the source world, what we nowadays call source, what we call source. But source is that which creates the universe. And the book of creation is really a book about how the universe is created this moment every day. And so I learned how to tap into it and make requests. And I think it's not, it took me a long time to understand this, but it's very similar to a prayer. If you make a prayer to God, let's say, you know, you're actually making a request. And if you make a very detailed request, and a very exact and definite request with clear question and a clear answer possible, you know, then you get answers. That's how it works. And you get them immediately. You make the answer, make the request. It's not a sort of iffy-bitty wait 3 weeks and tells you the answer. You get it immediately. That's the way prayer works. But most people don't understand that. I could run a whole class on how to use prayer. But anyway, but what I did was I requested the answer in a bottle. And the advantage of that is I'm not involved. And the bottle is, it's like, if you request an answer to yourself, you know, tell me how to make the remedy for AIDS, then I've got the problem of making it. Whereas if I ask for it in the bottle and it's done, I don't have to get involved in the process. I'm just making a request. And it took me a long time to understand the subtleties of this request and how much skill I put into it and how much, you know, so it's taken like 20 years to really unfold that process. And we've now got it down to a fine art, and we know what we're doing, and you know, it's the core of what we do. It's the core of source medicine, is how we do it and how we hold it and the depth of it and the integrity of it. And it's a high level sort of skill, and it's not something we deliberately set out to, or I set out to develop. I just stumbled upon it in a way, and I saw it working, and then we gradually refined it and understood it better and realized what's involved, and you know, got better at it.
Okay. So then after you created, fast forward, you created the one for AIDS, what was next?
Well, malaria was the next one. It's the most obvious because it's still probably the biggest killer in Africa. So I tried one for malaria, and we had some pretty interesting experience. It worked. First of all, it worked to treat, and has done ever since. But for example, we treated a school with 600 children, and they had on average about 100 and something of those children who at any given time had malaria. So we treated we taught the teachers how to treat the students, and they treated the students, and the students got better. And they said, well, why don't we just treat everybody so that we don't have to keep treating the ones as they get sick? So they treated everybody. We gave them a protocol, which is probably once a day for a week, and then every month after that or something. And they did that. And after a year, they didn't have any cases of malaria, and they stopped doing it. And after that, they still had no cases of malaria, because what had happened was that they became resistant to it. So we got a prophylactic effect and a treatment effect. And we realized that was like stunningly different. We've moved into prevention and cure in one go, which was beautiful and amazing. And then, so,
where in Africa was that school?
Probably in Kenya, but I'm not sure. We've worked in so many countries. We worked in the Congo and in Malawi and Rwanda and Tanzania and South Africa and Central African Republic, and I mean, I could go on, but not just me. We had teams of people living in. We started out in different countries, and we created local teams of people. We had one man who was called Mr. Malaria, Mr. PC Malaria, because it was called PC at the time. PC 240M was the one for malaria, and he was treating people near a local hospital. And after a while, the hospital called him in and said, look, you need to come and see us. And they said, look, since you've been treating people for malaria, we've got no patients. And with no patients, we can't pay the staff, because we rely on the patients to give us a fee so we can pay the staff. So we're going to report you to the government or the police or something if you don't stop doing this. So we said to them, so we talked about it between ourselves, and we said we got him to teach the hospital how to treat malaria properly and equip them with enough stock to keep them going forever. And then we asked him to move away and go somewhere else and work somewhere else, which worked. And so the hospital got to treat malaria properly, and he got to keep his job in a different area, which made sense. But I mean, that's the sort of level things operate on in Africa.
Mm-hmm. And where was that?
You're asking me again, but it's, I'm guessing it was Kenya, but I'm not sure. We've done a lot of work in Kenya.
Okay. And so, and then you've since given the remedies, because they can be created relatively easily. You've given them and given other practitioners instructions on how to use them and replicate them. And
there was one huge difficulty we had, which we still have in a way, is that unbeknown to us, the immune systems of the Africans are so much stronger than the immune systems of the West. So what you can achieve in Africa, you can't achieve in the West. And we've got an article on our website, sourcemedicine.zone, which gives all that information. It gives you about 30 reasons why there's a huge difference. And of course, in conventional medicine, there's no difference between the treatment of Africans and the treatment of Westerners. But from our experience, and not just me, but serious, like George Vitulkas I talked about earlier, as a leading world homeopath, in his book, he talks about the same issue, the difference in vitality of a remote mountain person who doesn't have heating in their house and grows their own food and lives and doesn't live in civilization, compared with a Westerner who lives in the supermarket, so to speak, is huge. So this technology doesn't transfer just like that to the West. Mainly, for example, in Africa, mainly African diseases are due to epidemic diseases, and so our big experience, and what I've become I think I must be a holistic world expert on this subject, one of the experts on how you treat epidemic diseases, which is where I cut my teeth, where I started, and where we're still working on right now.
Right.
But when it comes to treating chronic diseases in the West, they're not epidemic, or they are sort of, but in an inherited sort of way. But treating Westerners' diseases is much more complicated and much more tricky in this method. So we didn't get the same results in the West. And of course, if you try telling people in the West you're doing wonderful work in Africa, they want wonderful work in the West. They're not interested in Africa. And if you can't deliver that, then it doesn't really make much impression on people.
Right.
So that's one of the things we've been struggling with ever since. And we've done a lot of work on it, and we've made systems that do deliver in the West, but they're much higher skill than you need in Africa. In Africa, my experience is, and you can take some healthcare workers in a small clinic, and you can train them in a week, and they can then treat most people that come and see them with our pills and liquids. And they can treat pretty much any epidemic disease and any trauma, all the main traumas that happen, like murder and rape and such like. And they can treat 70 to 80% of all comers quite successfully after a week's training, which is amazing, when you think what normal medical training is like.
Right.
You can't do that in the West.
Right. And so fast forward to now, why don't you talk a little bit about the projects that you're most interested in and what you're working on, and some of the things that you're seeing?
Well, I should say that in about 2004, there was a SARS corona epidemic, which looked as though it could be serious, and the world panicked. For a few weeks, everybody held their breath. And it was more effective than the present one, but because of that, it died out quicker, because it killed people around it much quicker. And it was quite obvious to me that the technology or the remedies that we have for treating epidemic disease in Africa would work pretty well for that as well, if only I could get people to try it. So, of course, and that was not doable, but I made the remedy anyway and sent it out to people. But it also occurred to me that actually, if you had a worldwide epidemic that was really infectious, you wouldn't, and this corona one at the moment is infectious, but it doesn't spread as fast as we expected it to spread. So, and previous epidemics have, like the influenza of 1918 killed 40 to 100 million people in a population half the size we got now in a matter of 12 weeks. So they used to whip around the world with the 4 aeroplanes. So it occurred to me that to deliver to an epidemic, you needed something that was more transportable. So that's why I made remedies for sound, with sound, using audio, because audio you can send via an email, and that makes, in other words, you could upscale it. You could upscale it from 0 to 1 billion people in a week or less.
Or less. With technology, it's in an hour.
In an hour. So you could have it around the world in an hour. It's not quite as clear as that, but pretty good. And we've done a lot of work on how to make it work for all sorts of different communities. So in Africa, you know, you could broadcast a corona one now and stop it in its tracks. If you got the country all to listen, you could stop it right now. We haven't got proof of that, but we're pretty sure that's the situation. And when we've got some proof, we're going to try and handle it, see if we can manage that. And in the West, we could also do a lot towards bringing this corona epidemic to a close if we can prove that it actually works and get past the early stages. But that's why I changed. The reason I transferred over to audio was because of the task of treating rapidly spreading epidemics throughout the world, which I foresaw was going to become a big issue. And even a year ago, when I was in China, I said to them, I said, you know, we're the only system that can treat an epidemic fast and effectively. And they said, and you know, I said, if another SARS-like thing breaks out, you don't have an answer. Oh, and the official guys stood up and said, oh yes, the Chinese government's got a plan. I thought, no, it doesn't. And anyway, I told it to them about 6 months before the event, but such is the ways of the world. But anyway, that's where I got to. So now we're now pioneering in how to treat specific diseases in the West which are treatable by these methods, like diabetes is one we're going for. But we're also moving into other fields like plants and animals, and the system works in different ways, but we're spreading our wings, so to speak.
And what sort of things are you seeing? I know we talked the other day. What sort of things are you seeing with the plants? I know you just started that work, but
well, yeah. We're a few weeks away from having some concrete results that will be really meaningful. But for example, the cucumber plants that we treated to make them really healthy and vibrant grew about 30% faster than the controls, which was sort of interesting. You know, you've got 30 centimeters more growth in the matter in the same period of time, which, you know, doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's a pretty good fertilizer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're also working on disease resistance too, not just growth.
Yeah, well, but they're also going to be much more disease resistant. And this is in a controlled greenhouse. This is in a really high-tech greenhouse where there's complete control over the local environment. So this wasn't an accident that they grew faster. But now we're waiting to see how the disease resistance pans out. And we've treated, for example, this week, 135,000 strawberry plants, for example, and maybe 20 to 50, or maybe 40,000 trees and such like. So we're getting to use, and so come the end of this summer, or come the winter, come the autumn, we'll know from the harvests and the taste of the fruit and the quantity and the quality, and the disease resistance, we'll know that this system's working for plants. We know it works for animals because we've got vets who use our stuff all the time and they swear by it.
They're using, is it specific for animals, or is it the human stuff they're using on animals?
They use both, but you know, we use human stuff on the plants because although plants don't suffer in quite the same way as humans or animals, they do still suffer. So we still use some, but mostly for plants, we use sort of plant stuff. For animals, you know, fleas, for example, in cats and dogs, that's an animal thing. So we make one specially for fleas and such like in animals. And so there's certain pests and diseases that animals get that we can treat. But there's been a long history of, I think in England, on an average year, we treat more animals with homeopathy than we do plants, than we do people. Because it's very easy to treat, you know, 1 million animals compared with one person.
So why do you think, I mean, I have my ideas, but why do you think homeopathy has not been embraced by Western societies in the way, say,
Well, I think it's to do with consciousness and the dominant consciousness of the age. And the dominant, even in the time of Samuel Hahnemann, who created homeopathy, the first people to attack him were the pharmacists because they didn't like it because he was diluting the herbs and the substances right down. So there was no business model there. So they attacked him then. And the pharmacy is, is the proverbial tail that wags the dog of the medical profession. And they've been wagging it for several 100 years. And nowadays they're one of the biggest industries in the world. So, sorry about that.
It's okay.
So that was one of the biggest. That's one of the biggest industries in the world. So, and we live in a materialistic age. All science, pretty much all science, and a pretty lot of other things are actually very materialistic. I mean, some people think there's organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry, which to me, there's no line where something's dead and something's alive. Everything's alive. I mean, the concept of Gaia, everything's alive. The whole planet's alive. The whole universe is alive. Everything's alive. Just a question of where the aliveness is and how you measure it or how you can be with it. So from an aliveness point of view, homeopathy doesn't fit, just like religion doesn't really fit into science. There seems to be a conflict, but a lot of people go for religion, and they're going for the essence of life. Religions have various forms, but they're basically about the essence of life. And science is about the practicality of life, the solidness of life. And science has, done some discoveries like quantum physics and such like. So we do know now that, solidness, time, space, and all those things are sort of inventions of our faculties, our senses. But at the same time, we live in this world and we use those things just like we use speech. We use time and space as useful constructs, but they're not actually, on one level, they're consequences of the deeper levels, what I call the energetic or the spiritual level of the universe.
Right.
So that's a very unpopular message at the moment, and really because there's a lot of money in the other view. You can buy an awful lot of press coverage and buy an awful lot of medical science, and you can control a huge amount of system without deliberately trying to do it, just by putting the money in the right places. And I'm not saying it's manipulation; it's just the type of age we live in.
Right. Yeah, I know the idea of Einstein's E equals mc squared. Everything is energy, right? Matter and energy are basically similar. Everything's vibrating, light, sound, energy, and that makes a lot of sense from my perspective as a doctor of acupuncture and working with energy medicine in a very systematized way. And homeopathy is its own energy medicine system. So it makes a lot of sense to me. When I first heard about what you were doing, I, was, initially, very intrigued, but also I had a little bit of skepticism because I didn't see it for myself. And then when with the pills and liquid and the AIDS and malaria, and then when you started telling me about that you had it in audio, I was even more skeptical. Like, okay, now this guy's a total kook. And I said, all right, well, I'm open-minded. I believe it's possible. I'm not sure I believe what he's saying actually can work. And so I tried it on myself. First with, it was back in July when I was having, we had pollen and I was having sinus allergies, and tried it and listened to the audio and customized it. And the next day it was, all better. And I thought, all right, well, is this placebo? Am I just have beginner's luck or what? And so then I said, all right, now I'm really going to try it. And I created it for asthma, which I've had since I was 2 years old. And, it's always worse in the end of pollen season. So I had been using my inhalers, 2 different inhalers, several times a day during that few week period. And I listened to the asthma one, and the very first time I listened to it, I actually could feel my bronchioles opening after about 45 seconds, like I had just done a rescue inhaler. So I said, all right, there's definitely something to this. And so then after about 6 or 7 days, my asthma was virtually 99% gone. I didn't use my inhalers anymore since then. And that was, 9 months ago. So I was, at that point, I was like, all right, there's definitely something to this, and started doing more experimenting on friends and family, and then slowly started, introducing it to, a few select patients in my clinic, and people that, clients that we work with for various different chronic disease and acute diseases and things like that. And I would say, for the most part, because we've been working together and sort of optimizing the delivery pathway, if you will, I would say it's probably north of 90% effective. And I think probably the 10% that's not effective, it's because I might not have given them the exact right one. Like, instead of giving somebody, a one for, say they had a chronic cough, maybe I didn't ask them the right questions. Like I was giving them something for a flu, when in fact the cough was from, chronic bronchitis that they had had several times 2 years ago, and it never got better since that time. So then when I switched them to the right one, then it would work. So it was really more my clinical, airball as opposed to, it not working. So, it's been an interesting, interesting ride, collaborating with you on working with these. And so I commend you on, your creativity on thinking outside the box and coming up with this modality. So.
Yeah, well, you make it sound easy, which is great. But the other side of it is that the level of, like, you can get results in some people, like people who've had a lot of acupuncture, for example, are a lot healthier in general than otherwise. Acupuncture wouldn't work. They've got a much better system, so it's much easier to work with them. But generally, with the general population in the West, the ones who don't live rugged lives and don't have healthy bodies, the difficulty is like 100 times more than it is in treating an African, for example.
Right.
If an African has an injury, then you treat him for injury and it gets better.
Right.
And even if it's 20 years ago, it's still better. Whereas if you treat a Westerner and they've had an injury, you don't know, there's a whole lot of other complications that might have been involved, like lots of painkillers and toxic effects and goodness knows what, and it's not so straightforward.
Right.
So, the working with chronic disease in the West takes a lot higher skill in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know with my diabetes company, we've been doing sort of a pilot with the resonances for diabetes, and you're right. It doesn't work with everyone, but the people that it does work for, it's almost like a drug that not only reduces their need for medication, but it also is normalizing their blood sugar, or both. It's normalizing it's bringing their blood sugar down from a diabetic to a pre-diabetic to a normal blood sugar level, or they're coming off their meds and their blood sugar is staying the same, or it's doing both, meaning they're coming off the meds and normalizing their blood sugar. So, and again, we're obviously in the early stages of this, so it's not working for everyone. It's still experimental, and but it's super safe, and it's not having a dangerous hypoglycemic low blood sugar events that people would have if they took too much insulin. It's sort of happening in a more gentle and balancing type of way. So creating homeostasis is what it seems like it's doing. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that hints at what we're really doing. What we're really doing is sort of, I mean, some people believe that, well, it's about consciousness, and I'm just trying to put it into context. Most people think of themselves as a single life event. And I don't see that. I think that what we are is a continuous life form, life energy, which takes a body, mind, once every so often, and has a life experience. And what we're doing is, and the quality of our life experience relates to this consciousness which we are, which is permanent. So what we're doing with the resonance is really untapping the potential of that, because behind us is enormous intelligence. We are all coming from one enormous intelligence, which contains all the information that's ever needed for everything that's ever happened, so to speak, including how to treat a disease. How to develop resistance towards it and to not get it and to recover from it. So what we're doing is really conscious energetic medicine. And in the process, people are waking up to a bit more of who they really are. And that is essential, because otherwise they would just carry on the same old habits and keep repeating them. You know, if you're diabetic and you keep eating sugar by the tablespoonful every day, you're not going to get better. But if you suddenly wake up to the fact you're doing that and stop doing it or reduce it, then you've got a chance.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what level that's on, whether it's to do with, you know, incarcerating your emotions and shutting them down so you get heart complaints, or whether it's, you know, holding back on your anger and getting liver complaints, or whatever it is, or being totally frozen in fear and getting kidney complaints. Whatever it is, you know, like if you start to release the process, you know, we are the ones who are creating our own illnesses, and with inherited patterns and acquired patterns and social patterns and such like. And to come out of that, we have to become a little bit more awake to what we really are. It doesn't mean we've got to do anything spiritual or pray or anything like that, but we've got to become, it's a question of waking up to what we really are, which is a form of consciousness.
Yeah. Good. So, this has been a very interesting and I think for the viewers it will be an eye-opening dialogue, I hope. And is there anything else that you want to sort of finish with, or any final thoughts?
Well, there is some backup information. There are websites with a lot of stuff on it, a lot of videos on our sister site, which is about working in Africa. So you can see some very interesting videos which will portray what's really gone on. There's a couple of books I've written on this subject. One's called The Second Simillimum, and it's in print, and one called The Homeopathy for Diseases, which was in the early stages of this work, and that's an ebook now. It's out of print, so it's an ebook. And that, for practitioners, this is sort of, you know, reading that gets you the full depth and breadth of the subject. And in that book, Homeopathy for Diseases, we talked a lot. We made communication with viruses and bacteria, which is getting a bit like horse whisperers. It's getting more common nowadays how to do that sort of thing. Lots of people do it. And so you can, and it's a sort of recognizing that everything is consciousness. There's no such thing as good and bad. You know, a coronavirus is not bad in itself. It's doing a useful job for the human race. It just doesn't happen to recognize individuals. That's our experience of viruses and bacteria. They see the human race as one, like an anthill, one complete entity, which is a bit sick. So they just trim some of the sick off it. You know, and the more spiritually inclined people see this COVID-19 as actually a healthy thing for the planet, because at the moment the human race is very systematically and progressively trying to destroy the planet and make it so it's unlivable for us and all forms of life, and that has to stop. And somehow we have to stop capitalism, in, you know, not small scale capitalism, but big scale capitalism, and big scale armaments and big scale whatever has got to slow down and reverse and start looking after the place. We've got to make greening and looking after the planet number one priority. And some of us think that the coronavirus is one of the tools that's being used to do that, because we're too stubborn, basically, to recognize that what we're doing. So the viruses and the bacteria will come in and hammer us until we wake up. And they're not evil in any way. You know, it's just just understanding there is no evil on this planet. There's no good and bad.
Very good. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you and collaborating with you over these last almost a year now, and I'm sure we'll have some more conversations in the future. So I just wanted to give everyone a sense of sort of your background and your story and where this stuff all came from. So thank you, and it looks like it's getting dark there, so I'll say good night, and we'll see you soon.
It's going to get dark in the time, yes. Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Geoff. Nice to talk to you. And
bye.